Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time, Masechet Rosh Hashanah. Today is our fifth lesson, and we are going to be reviewing Daf 25 through 29. It's a little fewer Daf today, but they are packed with information. So Bezrat Hashem, you will enjoy this shiur. And I'll say it at the end, but next week we will also be meeting on Sunday, but in the morning New York time. So I will email you closer when we get closer, and I'll remind you at the end of this shiur. Okay, Daf 25 starts with a Mishnah at the top of the page. I will actually share my screen. And we are going to continue talking about making it Rosh Chodesh. So you can see here, we ended last week talking about the different pictures that Rabban Gamliel would show the witnesses when they would come to the temple. So we're going to continue talking about witnesses coming to the temple and giving their testimony. So there's a story at the top of Daf 25 that two witnesses came, and they said that they saw the old moon in the morning and the new moon in the afternoon, and one on the east side and one on the west. Now, we had learned that you cannot see the moon for 24 hours between the old new moon and the new moon. So this actually does not make sense. But Rabban Gamliel accepted this testimony, and the Gemara is going to explain how. Basically, Rabban Gamliel was an expert in astronomy, and he understood that there were, I would say, exceptions to the rule. Another story was a witness came and said that they saw the new moon, and then they didn't see it the next night. Now, that is also not a natural occurrence, but Rabban Gamliel did accept this testimony. Rabbi Yoshua disagreed with Rabban Gamliel. Those of you who are familiar, there are a few stories in the Gemara where Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua kind of butt heads. Rabban Gamliel was the head of the court of the Beit Din. He was the Nasi. He was the it's a leading authority at the time, and Rabban Gamliel wanted to make sure that everyone understood that you needed to accept his ruling because he was the Nasi, and therefore Rabban Gamliel made Rabbi Yoshua come to him on the day that Rabbi Yoshua thought that it was Yom Kippur. Again, he disagreed when the new moon was. That would lead to a discrepancy in when Yom Kippur was. Rabbi Yoshua thought it was a day earlier, and Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yoshua thought it was a different day than Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel made Rabbi Yoshua come to him with his basically like his knapsack and his wallet, his stick and his bag to show that he's accepting Rabban Gamliel's decision. And this obviously was very traumatic. He was very upset. Rabbi Akiva told Rabbi Yoshua to accept Rabban Gamliel and the court. And again, right, he says that every court is official and you need to accept their ruling. And Rabbi Yoshua did, meaning he accepted the ruling. He came on the day that he thought it was Yom Kippur. He came to Rabban Gamliel with his money, with his staff, and he did accept Rabban Gamliel's decision. The Gemara says, how could these, again, as I mentioned, this testimony, how could there have been a difference in the length of time that they could see the moon? So the Gemara explains that sometimes you can see the moon in less than a 24-hour time period. And here there's a picture of this idea that the orbit is sometimes longer or larger than normal. There's a longer orbit and a shorter orbit. Sometimes it's 29 days and 20 minutes, and 29 days and 20 hours, and sometimes it's 29 days and 6.5 hours. And therefore, it did make it possible to see the moon in less than 24 hours. So again, here, right, the Gemara says that a month can cannot be shorter than 29 and a half days, 40 minutes, and 73 parts. But as you see, there is a fluctuation of the orbit itself. Rabbi Kiva, again, going back to the story in the Mishnah, Rabbi Kiva saw that Rabbi Yoshua was so upset, and Rabbi Kiva explained to Rabbi Yoshua that God gave us, the court systems, the ability to declare when it is the new moon, and therefore we needed to listen. Even if Rabbi Yoshua felt that he was right, we need to listen to what the court establishes. Even if you feel it's not accurate, what was established by the court is seen as the official new moon and the official new month. Okay, here there's the Gemara says that there's a verse that equates 3 great people with 3 lesser people, and therefore it shows that in their generation, they're all considered distinguished, right? Meaning we have Moshe and Aharon and lesser people as well. Each one is considered a leader in his generation. So here the Gemara is saying Rabban Gamliel is the leader in the generation, and Rabbi Yoshua needed to accept his leadership, right? You have to follow the judge that's in your generation. You can't compare it to another generation. And the chapter ends when Rabban Gamliel, when he sees Rabbi Yoshua coming to him and he sees that he listens to him, he stood up and he blessed him and he praised him. So we see that there was a mutual respect for the leader and from the leader to the people as well. And with that, we finish the second chapter of Masechet Rosh Hashanah. The third chapter continues with this idea, but then we're going to go into practical law, practical halacha for Rosh Hashanah. So first, the Mishnah tells us that the Beit Din, the court, and the nation, all, if they all saw the moon on the 30th day, and the witnesses were examined, but they didn't have time to sanctify the new moon, so then it's not considered the new month till the next day. Meaning, even if, again, this is the idea, even if everybody saw the new moon in the sky, the court needs to sanctify the new month. Until that happens, it's not considered Rosh Chodesh yet. And therefore, if it doesn't happen before nightfall, it will only be considered the new moon or the new month the next day. If only, what if, now the opposite, what if only the court, the Beit Din, saw the moon and no witnesses came? So then the Mishnah says that 2 of them should be the witnesses and the rest should be the court. What if there were only 3 people total there? So, right, if only 3 people saw it and they're the court, so 2 of them become witnesses, and then they bring 2 more people to make this into a court. The minimum number of people to make a court is 3, and therefore you cannot have the Mishnah tells us you cannot have a court of 1. There cannot be 1 judge. The minimum amount is 3 judges. The Gemara continues and says that if everybody saw, again, as I mentioned, you still need to sanctify the month, and you still need to examine the witnesses, even if it's clear in the sky, and then you must declare the new moon before the nightfall. Okay, and from here, the Gemara talks about judgment in general. And when a court is sitting in judgment of monetary issues, if they start to hear the testimony during the day, they started hearing the case during the day, so then you can finish it at night. However, Rosh Chodesh, right, the new moon is considered mishpat, and this is different, and therefore it must be started and completed during the day. It cannot go into the night. Okay, again, the Gemara then adds that if the court saw the moon during the day, they can sanctify the month without any witnesses coming, right? If the witnesses didn't come, because they saw it themselves, and therefore that is okay at that moment. However, if the court, I would say the judges, only saw it the day before, meaning the night before this day when they're sitting in judgment, then you need to set up, as I mentioned before, witnesses and judges. However, if you can see it in the sky in the daytime, then they can sanctify the month without actual testimony. Okay. Daf 26 tells us, right, that some people can be witnesses and some people can be judges. And then the Gemara says, no, right, the witnesses cannot be the judge. As we mentioned before, we need to separate them. The witness is the witness. The judge is the judge. Okay. The next Gemara is going to start talking about shofar. And hold on, here we'll bring some pictures of shofarot. We're going to start talking about shofar. To remind us, we are in Masechet Rosh Hashanah. So let's talk about what are the minimum requirements for the shofar to make it a kosher, a valid shofar to use for Rosh Hashanah. So the Mishnah starts and says, all shofarot, all horns are valid except for a cow's. And we'll see why in a minute. I guess we would say a bull. Or another opinion is you can use all animal horns, even if it's a cow, because the verse says that it needs to be a keren, a horn, and any horn is a keren, and therefore it's okay. So the Gemara explains this Mishnah. The Gemara says that a cow is only called a keren, a horn, but it's not referred to as a shofar, and therefore it can't be used. And then again, the Gemara says, no, maybe it can be used. However, the Gemara gives us a more philosophical reason why we shouldn't use the cow, the bull, I guess, the horn of the bull, because the Gemara says that in Hebrew we say en kategor naasa sanegor, right? The prosecutor cannot become the defendant, the defender. What does that mean? That we know that the Jewish people in the desert worshipped the golden calf. The golden calf, again, from the cow family, caused the Jewish people to sin, and therefore we don't want to use the horn of an animal that caused us to sin or that we sinned with it. We don't want to use it in order to defend ourselves. Again, the shofar is blown as a defender of the Jewish people, and therefore we shouldn't use it. So too, the Gemara says that the high priest doesn't wear gold clothing in the temple on Yom Kippur when he goes into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the inner sanctuary, because again, the accuser cannot be the defender. So too, again, here the shofar as well. The Gemara says you have to blow one shofar and not more than one at the same time. And interestingly, here's another reason. Interestingly, the cow's horn grows in layers. You can see here, it's showing, the picture shows Shana Echad, Shana Bet, Shana Gimel, right? That each year there's another layer that's placed on the cow's horn, and therefore it looks like it's many shofarot, and therefore you cannot use the cow's horn as well. The Gemara continues and says that we should use the horn of a ram, and therefore that is the best that we should use. And here, the Gemara goes into a whole discussion about different words that are used for different things, and how in different places they use different words. And there's a whole list of these words and their unknown definitions. Okay, the next Mishnah tells us that the shofar of Rosh Hashanah in the temple, again, as we said, should be from a wild goat. And it should be straight, and its mouth, and it should be coated with gold. We'll see where exactly it's coated with gold. And in the temple, they also blew 2 trumpets on either side of the shofar. and the shofar would have one long blast as opposed to the trumpets, which would be shorter, so you could hear the shofar specifically, right? Because the mitzvah, the commandment of the day, is with a shofar. The Gemara, the Mishnah continues and tells us that on public fasts, they would blow the shofar, and this would be a ram's horn, and it would be bent. So here is what a bent horn looks like, a bent shofar looks like. And this one is coated with silver, and the two trumpets would be in the middle. And here, because it's a fast day, the shofar would be a shorter blast, and the trumpet would be a longer blast, because that is the commandment of the day, would be trumpets and not the shofar. Okay, on Yom Kippur of the Yovel year, of the Jubilee year, that's like Rosh Hashanah. And here it says it's like Rosh Hashanah in the sense of the shofar that's blown, and for the tefillah, the prayers that are said on that day. Or again, on Rosh Hashanah, again, it's a ram, and on Yom Kippur of the Jubilee year, it's an ibex, Yael, and again, it would be straight as opposed to bent. Or again, the Mishnah finishes by saying, no, both of them are bent, but the rest, again, is the same. But the rest of the year, you use the straight shofar. Okay, the Gemara says that on Rosh Hashanah, okay, so now we're going to talk about bent versus straight. And here the Gemara explains it more theologically or philosophically, right? On Rosh Hashanah, the more you bend, the better, again, figuratively and literally for the shofar. And therefore, you should use a bent shofar. For Yom Kippur, the more you are straight, the better. Again, we're talking about Yom Kippur of the Yovel year, of the Jubilee year, and therefore it should be straight. It's a sign of freedom. Or, again, another opinion says, on Rosh Hashanah, you need to be straight. Again, we're praying to God. But on a fast day, it needs to be bent. Again, we're gathering people, and this is different than on Rosh Hashanah. On Daf 27, the Gemara says, and here, remember, we mentioned that it needs to be coated in gold. What does that mean? So the Gemara says it cannot have gold by the mouthpiece, and that the gold that we were talking about was further down on the outside of the shofar. Again, and here the idea is that, so we'll talk more about the gold on the inside in a minute. And here the Gemara talks about how could it be that they blew the trumpet and the shofar at the same time? We can't hear or we can't distinguish between the different sounds. The Gemara says, no, it's okay. Again, as we said, the shofar will be a longer sound, and therefore you can hear it. Again, the tkiyah, and here the Gemara goes on to talk about the tkiyah, the sound of the shofar that is double in length. And we'll see this later on. There's a certain length for each one of the sounds. What if I blew a double length? Can it count for two tkiyot, right? For two blasts, right? Maybe I can say, oh, just split it up. It was a double in length, so it can count as two blasts. So the Gemara says that you cannot do that. But if you can hear the beginning or the end, again, back to our trumpet case, if you can hear just the end of the shofar, that is enough to fulfill your obligation for shofar. Okay, the Gemara teaches us that you cannot blow into, I have a picture here, into a pit, or a pit or other things, because you're going to end up hearing an echo. And if you hear it also says you can't blow into like a very large barrel, as you can see here. So the Gemara says why? We want to make sure that you hear the sound of the shofar and not the echo. So we want to make sure that you can. So that's number one. The Gemara says that you can distinguish two sounds from two different people, and therefore you can have the trumpet and the shofar at the same time, right? Because you're listening for that shofar sound. Again, we mentioned that the trumpet was to gather the people together, and that was covered in silver. Therefore, because this happened more often, the Torah didn't want us to have to coat so many things in gold. So the Torah was sensitive and said silver was okay as opposed to gold. Outside of the temple, they would only blow shofar or trumpets, right? Depending if it was Rosh Hashanah or a fast day. They didn't have both of them. In the temple, they blew them together, as we said. In the prayers of Rosh Hashanah, we say, this is the day that you created the world. And therefore, that's the prayer that's said on Rosh Hashanah. How could the Mishnah tell us that the prayer is the same on Yom Kippur of the Jubilee year of Yovel? So the Gemara says, no, you're right. That prayer is not said on Yom Kippur of the Yovel year, but all the remaining prayers are the same. Okay, the next Mishnah tells us that what if your shofar split in half and then you glued it together? This is invalid. You cannot use this as a shofar. You could see here, right, they glue it together. That doesn't work. What if it breaks up into pieces and they glued that together? That also doesn't work. Okay. We're not, let's do, okay, we'll get to these cases in a minute. Okay, what if there's a hole in it? So if the hole changes the sound, so then it's invalid. Again, as we mentioned here, the Mishnah that we quoted before, that if you blew into a pit or a cistern, if you hear the shofar, the sound of the actual shofar, so then it's okay. But if you hear the echo, so then it is invalid. The last case in the Mishnah is if you passed by a shul and you heard them blowing shofar or reading the Megillah for Purim, if you had intent to fulfill your obligation, so then it's considered valid. But if not, so not. And we're going to discuss in the Gemara what this means in a second. Okay, the Gemara says, what if you had a long shofar and you shortened it? So then that would be valid. Or if you thinned it, that would also be valid. What if you, that's this picture. Okay, what if you coated the inside with gold? That is not okay. However, if you coated it on the outside, as long as it doesn't change the sound of the shofar, so then it would be okay. We have a lot of pictures today. What about what if you put one shofar inside another? So if you only hear the sound of the inner shofar, right, again, that's the one you're blowing, so then that would be okay. If you hear both, so then that's not okay. Okay, here, what if you, what if you like turned it like inside out? Again, or, wait 1 second. Okay, wait, here they have, if you shaved it down, let me see if they show it. Okay, here, what if you, like you see here, this is like a hard one, but basically you took that dotted line is what it used to look like, and you widened the thin part and you narrowed the thick part, right? So you basically turned the shofar like the wrong way, right? So if you did that, so then that is invalid because it says that you need to, oh, this is if you add it, but I want to show you, oh, this is the whole. Okay, wait, no. So basically the Gemara says that the way it grows is the way you need to blow it, right? If you think about a horn, right? So it grows, right? The thick part is here, right? And it tapers off. So that is the way you need to blow it. You can't add it to the shofar that's here with even a part that is a shofar or even another thing. Again, what if you plugged up the hole with material from a horn, right, from the shofar? So that would be, one opinion says that it's okay. Another opinion says that it is not okay. And from here, we're going to discuss what is the minimum size of a shofar. it needs to be that when you hold it in your hand, you can see a little bit from each side. So that makes it much smaller than you would think. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. And the Gemara says that all sounds that are created by the shofar are okay, whether if it's a deep sound or a high-pitched sound, it doesn't matter. The Gemara explains also that the horn grows on the bone from the head, and you need to remove that bone in order to make a shofar. So that's this picture that when they like drill into it to remove that bone to make a shofar. Okay, let's go back to our case when we talked about blowing into the pit. So the Gemara says that if there were people inside the pit when you blew the shofar, they actually hear the sound of the shofar. So that is okay. But if you're standing outside and then you hear the echo, that is not okay. The top of Daf 28 tells us that if you hear part of the shofar from the inside, meaning the echo, and then part of it from the outside, so then that is okay, meaning you're doing partial, part echo and part not echo. So the Gemara says that is okay. The Gemara says maybe our case is really that a person is blowing for himself, and he starts, I don't know why, don't ask me why, but he starts from the inside. He was in the pit, and then he left the pit. So again, that is valid, because as long as he hears the sound of the shofar the whole time, then he is okay. The Gemara continues and says that you cannot blow a shofar made from an animal that is designated to be a korban olah, meaning a sacrifice that will be completely burnt on the altar. But if you did it b'di'eved, meaning like you did it without, let's say, knowing, retroactively it does work. And the Gemara explains because, and here's an important, temple concept. You're not allowed to use things that are gods, meaning that belong to God, or we'll call it sanctified by God. If you do, it's as if you're stealing from God. This concept is called me'ilah. Me'ilah means I stole something that was sanctified to God. Now, I'm not allowed to do that, but if I do that, then the item that I've stolen, or we'll say misappropriated, actually becomes unsanctified. It becomes chulin. It becomes mundane. So the Gemara explains that an olah, this sacrifice, is totally for God. Therefore, when I use it, I've done me'ilah. I've stolen from God, and therefore it becomes chulin. It becomes mundane, and therefore retroactively it does work because it is now a regular shofar. However, if I take a horn from a sacrifice that's called a shlamim, this shlamim is part owned by God, but part owned by the owners. Now, since it's part owned by me, when I use it, it's not me'ilah, right? I'm not stealing from God because I'm using something that's half mine or part mine, and therefore it is invalid even retroactively. The Gemara, though, says, no, maybe you can use both because, and here's an important concept, the concept is mitzvot were not given for our benefit. Okay, in Hebrew we say, or in Aramaic we say mitzvot, lav lehenot nitnu. They weren't given for us to benefit, meaning God told us to do certain commandments, and we do them because that is our obligation. Even if we enjoy doing them, that's beautiful, but we're not doing it to gain personal benefit. And therefore, we're not benefiting from these things. And here the Gemara continues, right? If you were forced to eat matzah and you ate it, right? So the Gemara says this is valid. Now we're going to another, one is that we do not gain benefit from doing commandments. Now we're going to talk about intent. Do I need to have intent when performing a mitzvah, a commandment? So the Gemara says that if someone forced you to eat matzah, that is considered fulfilling the mitzvah, even though you didn't have intent to fulfill this commandment. So now the Gemara goes off on a little tangent. Who forced you? Right? The Gemara wants to know who's forcing you to eat this matzah. Maybe it was that you went insane, you were possessed, and therefore, you ate it, but you weren't in your right mind. The Gemara says, no, that can't be the case because you weren't obligated to do the mitzvah in that case anyway. So the Gemara says, no, you were forced by the Persians, right? By non-Jews, they forced you to eat this matzah. And therefore, you're still fulfilled the mitzvah, even though you didn't have intent to do so. And therefore, the Gemara extrapolates that if a person is practicing blowing the shofar and you heard those shofar blasts, you have fulfilled your obligation, even though you did not have intent to listen to this shofar. And here the Gemara, again, here's another very important concept. Mitzvot einan tzrichot kavana, right? Mitzvot do not need intent. And now the Gemara is going to try to understand, what does this mean? What does it mean I don't need to have intent? So one idea is, what if I'm reading the Torah? I happen to be reading from a Torah, and I get to the part where it says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and it happens to be the time to say the prayer, right? So if I had intent, says this Braita, if I had intent, so then it works. But if I didn't, so then it doesn't work. Now hold on, we just said that mitzvot do not need intent. So what does it mean? So the Gemara explains here, intent means I needed to have intent to read it, right? Because maybe I was just checking the letters and I was looking at the letters to make sure the letters in my Torah were okay. That's not really reading it, or that's not really saying the words. If I had intent to read the words, so then I have fulfilled my obligation to say this prayer. But I don't need intent to kind of set it up as a prayer. I need to have intent to read the words, which is just very interesting in terms of how we think about prayer, right? We always talk about having kavanah, having proper intent while we're praying. Here it seems that even if I don't have proper intention, it works. So that's just important to understand. Okay. Again, so we were talking about intent. Remember, we had the case in the Mishnah. What if I walked behind a shul and I heard the shofar? Again, the Mishnah said I need to have intent to hear. I need to have intent, and then it's okay. So here again, the Gemara explains what is the intent. The intent is to hear the shofar. It doesn't necessarily have to be intent to fulfill my obligation for this actual mitzvah. Okay, from here the Gemara continues and tells us that the listener needs to have intent, but not the person who's blowing the shofar, or maybe vice versa. The person blowing the shofar needs to have intent, and not the listener. And either way, maybe, right, it's invalid. And the Gemara says, no, both of them need to have intent. Now we're going to get onto a new concept. We have seen this before. The new concept is called Bal Tosif. There is a commandment, a negative commandment, that you're not allowed to add to the mitzvot, right? We learned in Masechet Sukkah, I need to take 4 species, the arba minim, the lulav, the etrog, the hadath, and the arava. I'm not allowed to add more, right? That's called bal tosif. I'm not allowed to add. Okay, so right, this applies on the holiday itself, but it seems that it doesn't apply when it's not the time for the holiday. Meaning, if today you wanted to sit in a sukkah, you could do so because it's not the time to sit in a sukkah. So you're not adding to the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah when it's not the time for that mitzvah. So the Gemara talks about other cases of Bal Tosif, when the priests are giving their blessing, Berkat Kohanim, they're not allowed to add in their own verse, right? There are certain verses that they need to say. They can't add to those verses. The Gemara also talks about putting blood on the altar. And here there is a picture of the altar and how they used to put the blood on the different sides of the altar. And the Gemara gives us a case where what if the blood got mixed up together? Can I, put more blood on the altar? And here the Gemara talks about not only am I not allowed to add, I'm also not allowed to detract, right? Bal tigra means I'm not allowed to do less than the mitzvah. So what do I do? And the Gemara gives the answer on Daf 28. So again, to summarize the concept of intent, the Gemara says that in order to fulfill a mitzvah, the commandment, I don't need to have specific intent. If it's the time of the mitzvah, I can, or that is the time that I'm not allowed to add more to the mitzvah. And like we said, taking 5 species as opposed to 4 on Sukkot. Even without intent, you would transgress this commandment. But if it's after the time of the mitzvah, you need to have specific intent, I would say like specific negative intent, in order to have transgressed the concept of Bal Tosif. Okay, the last daf we're going to do is daf 29. And here we're going to continue talking about intent. Rabbi Zera told his assistant to blow the shofar with intent for him. This seems to show that both people need intent, the person listening and the person who is blowing. So the Gemara says, well, what about when we talked about the shofar case in the shul, right? That person doesn't know that there's someone walking behind the shul. So the Gemara says that when someone is in shul and he's blowing the shofar, he has intent for everybody who can hear the sound, even if they're not physically in the building itself, which is very interesting for any of you who blow the shofar in the shul. That needs to be the intent that you have. Now there's a machloket, a difference of opinion, whether the listener needs to have intent, and again, whether the blower has intent for himself. Maybe he doesn't need to have intent, kavanah, for other people, or maybe, yes, he does need to have intent for everybody who might hear him. From here, the Mishnah says, and here the Mishnah talks about different cases in the Torah where we have stories about miracles happening. And the question is, how did these miracles happen? So the Mishnah tells us that when the Jewish people fought Amalek in the desert, very famously, when Moshe would lift up his arms, so the Torah says that the Jewish people would win. And if he put them down, they would lose. And here the Mishnah asks or states, don't think that his arms had a special power. It wasn't magic. Rather, when his arms were up, it would cause the Jewish people to look up to heaven and beg for mercy or remember God, and then they would be victorious. The same thing when the Jewish people sinned and there was a plague and everybody started dying. There was a copper snake. God told them to make a copper snake that saved their lives as long as they looked up at that copper snake. Again, the Mishnah says, don't think that it's the snake itself that caused this miracle. It was when they looked up to God and remembered God, then he healed them. From here, the Mishnah tells us that a person who is deaf or insane or a minor, they cannot blow shofar for other people because they are not similarly they're not obligated, and therefore they cannot blow for another person, right? We say in, I guess, halachic language, they can't be yotze somebody else. This means they cannot fulfill the obligation for another person. However, we just saw, right, that somebody who has the same obligation can be motzi, can fulfill it for somebody else. So the Gemara says that on Daf 29 that everyone is obligated. Okay, now we have to know who's obligated in Shofar, right? Everyone is obligated in Shofar. All Jews, right? Kohanim, Leviim, Yisrael, freed slaves, a tumtum, we've seen before, is someone with non-specified genitalia, meaning they don't know the sex of this person. He is, or this person is obligated, but he cannot, again, fulfill the commandment for other tumtums, because again, we're not sure if they are male or female. Androgynous is someone who has both sexual, both genitalia, and therefore they are again obligated, and they can fulfill the obligation for other androgynous because they have both. Therefore, they can fulfill the mitzvah for both as well. So to a half slave, half free person, the Gemara explains that this is someone who's owned by two people. One of them frees him and the other one doesn't. He's really messed up because part of him is free and part of him is a slave. Therefore, we'll see in a minute, or we'll see right now, the Gemara says that he can't even blow for himself because maybe his free part is blowing for his slaved part, and that is not okay. Here the Gemara says, and this is an important concept, right? All brachot, all blessings, you can make, even if you made them already, you can make them again in order to fulfill the obligation for somebody else, except for what's called birkat hanehenim, which means blessings where you are enjoying something. Meaning, and the Gemara gives the example of making hamotzi on bread or hagafen on wine. If you make a bracha borei pri hagafen, you need to drink the wine. You need to enjoy that wine. But all other mitzvot you can fulfill, right? Think about at our Shabbos table, the host makes a hamotzi lechem min haaretz. The host eats the bread, and everybody at the table can eat the bread without uttering the actual blessing. All right. The concept here, the Gemara says, is from a famous concept, which is Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. Right. We are all, I would say, responsible for one another, and therefore I can make a blessing and have it fulfill your requirement as well. Here again, the Gemara gives two important examples. What about Kiddush, right? When we make Kiddush on Friday night, it has two aspects. One is I'm sanctifying the day. That's a mitzvah that I can fulfill for you. But it also has borei pri hagafen, meaning I need to drink the wine. So the Gemara says that because it has the sanctification of the day as well, you can make Kiddush again, even if you've already made it once before. So that's just important. So to Hallel and so to Megillah, you can say it again to fulfill other people's commandment to do so. And with that, we finish the third chapter. And now we're going to start the fourth chapter with a new Mishnah. So the new Mishnah tells us that when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbat, in the temple, again, when the temple was still standing in Jerusalem, they would blow the shofar in the temple, but not outside the temple. After the destruction of the temple, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai decreed that you should blow the shofar even on Shabbat on any city that had a court. It's very important to know, and we'll see this throughout Shas, that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lived in that time period right after, meaning during and after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, of the temple, and he took it upon himself to basically redefine Judaism that didn't have a temple at its center. If you remember, during the temple time, all religious life centered around the temple. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai basically created Judaism for the way we know it, in order to make a lasting Judaism, even when there isn't a temple. The Mishnah says that maybe when Rabbi Yochanan said that you can blow the shofar in any city that had a court, maybe he only meant Yavne. Again, Yavne was the religious center after the destruction of the temple. After the destruction, the Jewish center moved to Yavne. That's where the great assembly sat, where the great court sat, and that was the center of Judaism. And here the Mishnah tells us that there's a difference between Jerusalem and any other city. For Jerusalem, any city that can see its Jerusalem could blow shofar on Shabbat, again during the temple, but only in Yavne could they blow, meaning in the city, not any city that saw Yavne. The Gemara says that you cannot blow on Shabbat. Why can't you blow on Shabbat? One reason is because there are two verses that talk about blowing the shofar. One of them says, Zichron Tru'ah. It's to remind us, there's a memory of the blowing, of the sound, and therefore the Gemara says, what does that mean? There's a memory of it, that there are times when we don't blow the shofar. We just remember the shofar sound. And the Gemara says, really, what does this mean? That really, deoraita, according to the biblical law, you can blow the shofar on Shabbat, but dirabanan, right? But the rabbis decreed that you should not blow the shofar, lest you carry it to an expert to teach him how you should blow the shofar. So too Megillah, so too our lulav. We do not do that on Shabbat. But in the Beit HaMikdash, they knew how to do it, and therefore, because it's only rabbinic in origin, you can blow the shofar in the temple itself. And the Gemara here concludes that once they blew the shofar in Yavne, and that's how Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established it permanently. And here they said, right, there was a keren biyavne, right? They blew the horn in Yavne. And here the last line is that in Yavne, again, and anywhere else that there is an established court, you could blow the shofar on Shabbat. And with that, we are going to finish our shiur for today. Again, just to remind you, next week we are also going to meet on Sunday at 9 a.m. New York time, but I will send out an email for the exact time. So thank you, everybody, and Shavua Tov. And next week we will be finishing Masechet Rosh Hashanah together. So everyone get ready for that. Wishing everybody a Shavua Tov.